What's going on, STR Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Short Term Rental Secrets podcast. I'm your host, Mike Shogren, here as always with my main man and brother from another mother, Mr. Emmanuel Pani. What's up, E?
My brother, it's so good to see you as always. Man, I'm a little sad. This is the last show that I get to record from my grandpa's house. Somehow this month has come to an end. So yeah, it was everything I wanted. So I have nothing to complain about. It's just, time flies when you're having fun type of thing.
If you guys haven't been listening, he's been in Italy for the last month, visiting home and enjoying the Italian coast life.
I had forgotten how good a summer home was,
Mm.
of doing nothing. Like all I've been doing is just reading. And I brought with me I left home with like 7 books just because I have ADHD and I need multiple books to read at the same time. I've been reading The Power of Awareness almost exclusively this entire time. So I could have left with 2 books. And so one of the things that I want to share with our people is that book, The Power of Awareness. It's literally $11 on Amazon. And I just gifted it to Mike because he's starting the new round of Limitless. And I'm like, dude, some of this content needs to be in there. Yeah. And it's honestly, guys, it is the perfect book because they're short chapters. Like the longest chapter is probably like 4 or 5 pages, at least in the first section of it, and is absolutely dynamite.
So this book is by Neville Goddard, and I've been studying Neville. So E and I are big into personal development, and if you've been to any of our conferences and STR WealthCon, I'm always talking about the importance of mindset and upgrading your identity. And this book is one of my favorites. The irony is, in this book is a lot of the essays, like the individual essays that I've studied from Neville Goddard for years, and they're just all in one book, which is awesome. But yeah, if you've been struggling to grow the business, or you're feeling stuck, the fastest way to get out of that is to upgrade yourself and your self-image and really tap into the power of awareness. I'm holding it in my hand for those of you that are listening to the show. Phenomenal book. Um, Success in business comes down to two things. It's the investment in your mindset between your ears, and then your process and strategies and everything else. Which actually leads me into something I'm really excited about for next week, or by the time this episode comes out. I'm hosting a live training on Wednesday, August 14th. I'm doing it at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, because I know many of you have jobs and responsibilities and everything else. So I want to do it after hours to make sure as many of you could get on, because it's really going to help you. Our theme inside of STR Secrets, especially in the Facebook community this month, has been time freedom. Right? What we do is we help people get more bookings, more properties, and more time freedom. So the theme this month in the free group is time freedom. And so we've been putting trainings together every single week to help you get back more of your time, because we're in the middle of busy season, kind of coming towards the end of it. And I've noticed a lot of people, their revenue and their income is going great, but they've been running around super busy, working really hard, working on vacation, not being present with their kids and their family. And that's not the way that you want to do this. That's owning a job. And so next week, I'm doing this training called the 4-Hour Host Week, where I'm going to break down my 7 steps to elevate to CEO. And there's really 3 key things within those 7 steps that you're building upon. And it's your systems, your processes, and your people. And this is a framework that I use to build all the different companies that we have now, that I build them in a way that it's a business where it has systems, process, and people to run that business. And I'm not the one fixing all the problems and driving everything. Those things are the systems, processes, and people. So check it out. It's totally free. Go to go.strsecrets.com/4hour. And that's the number 4. So go.strsecrets.com/4hour to check out that training. Now, this week on the episode, I'm super excited. I've been friends with our guest Lame for I think 4 or 5 years at this point, something like that. And I've watched him grow and build a huge portfolio. And now he's got a coaching program, and he's helping a ton of people. He's got 180 doors now. He owns 120 of them, and he's just a beast and just a great human being. Anytime I get to hang out with him, it's always good energy, always super positive, and just one of those people that you'll hear it in a second of just, yeah, I just want to get around this guy. And so without further ado, Let's bring Lame on the show. Lame, what's going on, brother? Welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. I've been a fan for a long time, so I'm just thankful to have a seat at the table finally.
Dude,
So,
this is long overdue, right? We've got when was Breckenridge? Was that 21 or 22?
I think it was 21 or was it 20? Yeah, I can't even remember. I was around one of those
I
years.
think it was
Feels like it was
2021.
forever ago.
So Lame was in Kyle Stanley's mastermind, and we used to do one event a year where I would take some of our top students, Kyle would take some of his, Rachel Gainsborough, Noble Crawford, and TJ Tajani, and we'd each take like 5 students and do this annual trip. And we did one in Breckenridge, and it was a freaking blast. Like I had so much fun on that trip, and at that point, you were, I don't wanna say early, but, like, you were starting to gain some pretty good traction back then. But I'd love to hear you kind of rewind the clock because you've built an amazing portfolio now. You're getting close to 200 doors at this point. So, let's hear your, like, story on how you got into this whole game, and then we'll dive into a lot of cool creative finance stuff that you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to officially, I entered the real estate market in 2018. And that was by way of the way that everybody does, and that's you buy your first primary home on an FHA loan, right? But I always like that when people ask me my intro, like one of the compliments I always get is like, "Hey, how'd you build it so fast? How'd you do it in the last 5, 6 years, whatever?" My response is always, "I didn't do it in the last 5, 6 years. I did it in the last 30, right?" Because everything that all the past careers that I was a part of kind of led to this point to where there was a lot of things that I learned in different capacities that served me really well once I decided to jump in. One of those being, and I won't give you my whole life story, but one of those being door to door. I officially started in sales in a sales capacity in door to door sales back in college. And there's very few capacities where you can knock on the doors. This dude comes out pissed. He hates you, doesn't want to see you. 30 minutes later, I'm walking out his house, signed PSA, cold coke in my hand, and he wants me to marry his daughter, right? Like those soft skills that are developed in that type of communication and process serve very well when you decide to step into real estate, especially negotiations, deals, raising capital, etc. So I had a long history of door-to-door sales. I did that for about 8 years, ran teams, made good money. And then in 2018, when I was still in this capacity, is when I started officially in real estate. I bought my first home on an FHA loan. We wanted to move a year later, and I was too lazy to move furniture. Like this was literally how I got an Airbnb because I told my wife, I was like, nah, I'm not a mover. We ain't doing that. Like, let's just keep our furniture here and let's see what this Airbnb thing's about. That first month, I remember my goal was just to break even. Like I was like, if mortgage is not an expense, like that's a win. We netted 2 grand that first month, and that was the start of this journey, right? I didn't officially start my company there. I kind of just did it like everybody else, started buying, you know, a handful just here or there, just on normal traditional loans, conventional loans, FHA loans, whatever, moving out, repeating the process. I started a little bit of a management company by managing some of my friends just because they knew I was doing Airbnb. And so I was kind of helping, taking some revenue splits there. And then we officially started kind of Elk Ridge Management around COVID. And the way that it started originally, this company right here, sorry, the other side of me right here, this company originally started as a management company specifically. So we held no equity, right? And that's also where I met Kyle. Kyle helped me a lot in terms of being a mentor and starting the management side on a more official basis. Because by that time, I had learned enough to be dangerous. I was at no level to consider myself a professional expert at it until I met Kyle and kind of he helped me scale that side. Once I started to jump into that, I realized that that's not the dream. That wasn't where I wanted to go. I hated dealing with owners. There was a lot of control that wasn't yours. And so that's when we opened up our acquisition arm. And I decided to start buying my own properties. But the problem at the time was, how do I buy properties at scale without having to wait and build up 20% down, have to be subject to the market interest rates? And that's when I kind of found creative finance. And so my niche today really is kind of, I call it caster, right? It's this creative acquisitions. We're buying properties at literally half market rate. We're buying them at 10%, sometimes 5% down. And then we're taking the exit of it being a short-term rental and kind of combining those two. So incredible debt at scale. And then we're turning them into short-term rentals. And, that's what we have today. So today we have about 180 doors. I own the majority of those, so about 120, give or take, is ones that I hold equity in. And then we obviously have a smaller portion that we do manage, but we're really picky about that. And then even today, under the umbrella of Elk Ridge Management exists kind of 8 service companies. So car rentals, revenue management, cleaning company, design, and acquisition arm. And so we kind of make money along the entire vertical. So it's a long story. I try to condense it, but that's where we're at today, brother. So
That's
That's
is
a
a
great
lot
story.
to unpack in there.
That is a great story. The door-to-door salesman, I would think everybody, this is one of my opinions, right? Everybody should do sales. I remember doing cold calling sales for real estate expired leads. Oh man. Like the
It
hair in the
stinks.
back, the hair on my back kind of prickled up just now, just thinking about it, right? Especially down in Florida. There is some interesting folks down in Florida that'll pick up the
Oh yeah.
phone and just like tell you, if you call me again, I'm gonna kill you. I'm like, this is the first time I call you, but you got it, sir. I'll never call you again. Um, so I love Kyle. Kyle, in my mind, is a great systems guy. So I would love for you to kind of talk about how, when you met Kyle, you said you were dangerous enough. Do you remember what some of those things were that he gave you that made you extra dangerous? Like, if you could, like, kind of like be like, what made you a killer?
100%. So I think because as we all know, Airbnb is segmented with all these mom and pop operators, is what I call them, right? These are people that typically have 1 to 5 properties or less, right? And they're just self operating. And it's funny because, there is in this industry, there is a lot of those operators that for whatever reason, they just think that their experience is the best and that, maybe them operating it for a few years was everything that they need to be able to go and execute. And that was me. I bring that up because I was that avatar. I was that guy that struggled being able to think that there was more until I finally made the conscious decision that I was going to jump all into real estate. And so when you make a conscious decision to jump all into real estate, like that's when you finally, in my opinion, at least admit and realize that you don't know as much as you think you do. When you start to consider, how am I going to do this at scale? How am I going to go from 5 properties to 500, right? And so that's when I started to seek for a mentor, right? And that's where I found Kyle. And all of us as operators, especially at scale, understand and know that there is a science to everything that we do that goes far deeper than people realize. An example that I would bring up, just a specific one, is pricing. Right? How many of these operators that we come across, right? These mom and pop operators, as I like to put them, all think that they know the pricing, like that they like, they'll price them themselves. They'll price them based on, their anecdotal evidence of what they sees in the market. And, one of the biggest things that I always laugh about is when people brag to me that they're like, yeah, my counter's booked out for the next 6 months. And I'm like, that means you're underpriced. Like you're terrible. Right. And so that is just one thing that you learn when you start to dive into some of these processes and systems, is realizing that there's a deeper game to be played, right? And that goes with operations when it comes to cleaning, when it comes to how to manage your inventory, when it comes to how you're keeping up with the deep clean, cycling through that, house maintenance, especially when you start to get into asset management of you owning them. And so there's just so much that goes into it that needs to be systematized to be able to have an environment that can be scalable. And that's what I learned initially when I kind of learned this at scale as a property management. Backing into it that way, and I did it accidentally because it's funny. If you asked me what my goal was 5 years ago, I would have told you I want to be the biggest management company in the state of Utah or in the West Coast. That was my goal. And now I hate property management. Like I don't want anything to do with it. Like if I'm managing a property, it's mine, right? I want to be the brownstone. I want to be the brownstone and compete with Blackstone, right? I want to be an equity holder, right? But at the time, it was very valuable because I learned the game of operations at a very, very deep and intense and intimate level. And that served me well once I decided to jump into the equity game.
What's the team look like now? Because I've seen some of your content you've been putting on IG, interviewing some of your team members. Like, what's the structure look like now for you?
Yeah, great question. So I don't even know the exact number, but we probably employ somewhere around 50 deep between our entire capacity. We have essentially five key heads, and then I have an operational partner. The people, I'm kind of the face, and he's the operations. His name is Zach Larson, and he's the one that kind of runs the day to day on the operations side. And so those five key heads all report to him, and then under each of these five key pieces, obviously there's a lot of people that report to those five key heads, and mainly it's operations. There's customer experience. We have our ancillary services, our design, and then our maintenance. And so those are kind of the five at which we break it down. And we're still trying to, we still are. I feel like we're still a true startup, and so, I feel like within those five, we all kind of, pick up and we all kind of mesh together. But generally speaking, everybody kind of has their role in place, but everybody knows that this is a team effort to get it done right. So
Yeah. No, I love that. I always like to ask that question because E and I talk a lot about having the time freedom, and I know you got a lot of time freedom. And the only way that happens, in my view, comes down to three things: you got good systems, good process, and good people. And
absolutely.
those are the 3 elements that you need to build a business that's like a machine that can run, right? And you're the visionary, you're guiding it, but you're not driving it anymore, right? And that's such a big mental shift and a skill set transition where now you're the leader and you're focusing on leadership as opposed to like the nuts and bolts of revenue management and everything else, right? And that's such a key transition for scale.
Yep. And I also think that that is like one of the primary differences when it comes to mental capacity from the ma and pa to the actual professional operator is exactly that, right? Because in this game of hospitality, it's emotional industry, right? We make money off of creating memories. That's literally what we do. And in that, you have these mom and pa operators that get very emotionally attached to creating that experience, right? Not that I'm not today, but at scale, you have to detach yourself at a certain point in time from that business to be able to grow and move forward with your vision, right? And so I think that's where a lot of people fall short is they just want to continue to be a part of that experience. And granted, I am, but now at a very different level.
I don't know if you remember, but I did a webinar last night or training inside the Facebook group where I pulled it from that Breckenridge talk I gave on the 7 steps to elevating the CEO from Breckenridge, whatever it was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was showing them our SOP playbook and like how in depth it was. And I remember at that event, I was like, whose playbook looks like this? And nobody's hand went up. And I was like, this is what it takes, guys. Right. And I've seen you execute on that. And that's why you've been able to scale. So you've got the systems, those dialed processes, and then the right people. But it's the cool thing is it works in any business, right? Now you're applying it in different verticals between the car rental, the other ancillary services, the cleaning business. I have students that own fitness studios that use it to one of them just added 2 more locations. They're like, "Wow, this streamlined everything." I'm like, "Yes, this is just a universal business principle. It works in any business that you're in."
Absolutely. And you were one of those mentors at that Breckenridge that kind of, pushed me in the direction, especially of deep SOPs. Like one of the processes that we adopted from you that was like extremely valuable was your VAs, like how you essentially utilize VAs with the different tech stack for them to be able to pick up the phone and you getting business and revenue that way. So yeah, I attribute like I remember exactly what you're talking about because there was a lot of notes that I took that I implemented in my business. So I appreciate that.
And now you're the teacher, bro. The student
Well,
becomes the teacher.
you wanna know what's funny about that, right? So this business, I get these left and right. So this business right here, right? The Fearless Investor, as you guys know, Kyle was the owner, founder, and that was a very crucial part of my experience. But it's funny because years later, I didn't realize, I would have never guessed that, I would actually take a part as ownership and buy the company. And so now, I own this company with Kyle and I teach. And it's funny because I'll go back to some of the content and there I am, young Lama, just talking about how to get management contracts, right? And so it has been kind of a full circle moment that's felt really, really, really cool to be able to buy something that was such a crucial part of my growth. So yeah.
I love that, dude. I'd love to transition now into some of the creative finance stuff because you've really carved out this cool niche and it's such a hot topic right now with interest rates and a lot of people that bought properties, especially STRs that maybe they're underwater now because they're not managing them effectively. And so I'd love for you to break down what that is. We were talking about it offline, but I think it would add a ton of value to the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I decided to make the pivot really into equity, I think the problem that arises for everybody that's like, hey, I want to scale a portfolio. The problem always arises is how do I do that like logistically, right? And the only acquisition method that seems to be taught in mainstream life is just your traditional way of buying, which typically is an FHA loan. If you're living it as a primary, you can put 3.5 to 5% down, but you have to live in it as a primary for a year, or a conventional loan, or an investment loan. And in the traditional bank way of acquiring a property, if I'm buying an investment property that I am not moving into myself, then at minimum, you're putting 20 to 25% down. And oh, by the way, to you're subject to the interest rates of the market. And oh, by the way, you have to have the income, you have to have the taxes, the season money, all of the riffraff, right? And when you look at it like just like logically, there is no way that you can buy multiple properties a month realistically without a fat amount of money or financial backing in some way, right? And that was the problem that really stared me in the face as an operator wanting to scale. And so I went to work, and I'm a guy that just doesn't take no for an answer, right? And it's crazy how many people in the real estate space will tell you that there's no other way to buy property other than that, right? They're just ignorant. They're speaking out of ignorance, right? And so I decided to go on a journey of how do I find ways to buy that could allow me to scale, that I didn't have to go through all those methods, all of that riffraff. And then I landed on creative finance, right? Pace Morby, Chris Prefontaine, these are some kings in the industry that I learned from. But this method of buying is essentially a way in which you can buy where none of those things that you're held to in the traditional market matter. I don't need taxes. I don't need season money. Hell, I don't even have to be subject to the interest market rate. That is the beauty of creative, right? And under this umbrella, right? Because creative finance is an umbrella term, there's a lot of kind of specific strategies under that. There's really two primary ones that are the most relevant in today's market. First one is seller finance. And all this is simply is me finding a seller that has a property that's owned free and clear. There's not a bank note. He just owns 100% of the property, right? And instead of paying the bank interest on that note and going and getting a mortgage from a bank, I just make the seller the bank. I just approach the seller and say, hey, why don't I pay you hundreds of thousands of interest on a payment as opposed to the bank? And you'll be surprised at how many people are available to that. A statistic a lot of people don't know is that 48% of the homes owned in America are owned free and clear. There's a lot of people that are sitting on homes that they have no mortgage on, right? And those are opportunities for you to be able to approach them and to be able to create a deal. The second is creative. The second acquisition method that is the most relevant today is subject to. And that's short for me buying a property subject to the existing finance. Meaning, if somebody bought a property during COVID, they have inevitably an incredible interest rate, anywhere between 2 and 4%. I can buy that property subject to the existing rate that was on the property. So if somebody bought it in COVID, they have a 3%. I just cash them out of the equity and then I just take over that 3% note. And voila, you've already gained back X amount of cash flow simply because now I'm buying a property that's literally 4 points below the market today. Right. And so this has been the acquisition strategy that I've implemented that's really pushed me to scale. And it's crazy that people don't know about this stuff. Like, I remember when I started reading and learning, I thought it was fake. And then I bought my first one and I was like, holy cow, like this actually is real. Right. And I just went and executed and here we are. Right.
100
So,
120 some odd doors later.
yeah. Yeah. In really, 3, 4 years. Right. So, not a ton of time at all. So,
I hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast. We will get back to it in just a minute, but I wanted to share something with you about our Short Term Rental Secrets Facebook community. If you haven't joined it yet, I've got 4 reasons why you should. First off, it's completely free. Second, we have some amazing resources in there. First, you're going to get our deal analyzing tool that I personally built and we have used to analyze thousands of deals all over the world for our mastermind students at this point. I want you to have that completely free because the worst thing that you can do is get into a bad deal. It's very hard to fix your way out of a bad deal. So you got to know your numbers going into that. And I've got a free training that you can use to teach you how to use that tool effectively. The second thing is I've put together a 6-part course on our Casper method on how I build businesses, all the way from the beginning, how to set up my foundation, how to set up my entities, all the way through getting properties, automating, launching, scaling, hiring people. It is our unique Casper method that I use anytime I'm building a business. You'll have that completely free. Third, we have a live training every single week where it's either myself or one of our STR Secrets coaches that are giving you free content, free actionable steps, and a chance for you to jump on and ask your questions to us directly, completely free. And the last, and arguably one of the coolest things that we started doing lately, is we're posting free co hosting leads in that group every single day. So my team is going out and farming for these leads and posting them in the group for free for you to go and work those leads. And as part of that free training course that's in there, we'll show you how to go out and what to say, how to close those deals, how to onboard them, everything. So again, if you haven't joined the Short Term Rental Secrets Facebook community yet, head over there, click the join button. It's completely free. I'll see you on the inside. And now let's get back to the episode.
So I would love to, if you're down, for me to play kind of devil's advocate, right? For those listeners that are on the pessimistic or just like kind of stubborn, or maybe have read this at the beginning and kind of like you were like, this can't be real. But rather than doing what you decided to do, which is just educate and be like, you know what, let me try. Because Pace is a super reputable guy. He has done it. So you're like, look, he has proof of concept. Let's run with it, right?
Yep.
So walk us through what are some of the hardships, like some of the real things that could happen to somebody. Because again, there is always a con, right? There's always a pro and a con, right? So walk us through that. That's my first question. And then I have some more for you.
Okay, so I'll start first with the con of the process, right? And then we'll talk about the con of maybe the seller and the actual transaction, right? The first con that really is the biggest obstacle that needs to be overcome when taking a part of this is where to find the deals, right? Because automatically people are like, why would anybody do that? Why would somebody, you know,
Not sell it on the open
support?
market.
Exactly, right?
Mhm.
And here's where the market comes into play. First and foremost, the market is in our favor for these deals, right? It wasn't as relevant years ago, and that's why people didn't know about it, because why would you sell or carry some of your equity to a buyer if you could go to market and it was a bidding war? And that's what it was in COVID, right? But now you have a lot of these people that essentially they maybe bought during COVID, so they have an incredible interest rate, but because of how real estate has panned out the last 2.5 years, there's most likely no equity there after all commissions and everything are taken out, right? And so there's an opportunity for those type of people to be able to find them, transact them. Now, the obstacle in that process is finding them and closing them. And again, I come back to my experience of what taught me and prepared me to do that: door-to-door sales, baby. It's funny. People are always like, man, like, because when I first started, I was making hundreds of calls a day. And everybody's like, how'd you do that? I'm like, I was knocking 100 doors a day in the middle of Houston in the middle of the summer selling. Like, you tell me that call 100 doors in AC and I have Cheetos right here and a freaking Coke, like that's easy. And so my capacity of just hard and grit was just far greater than most, just because of my life experiences. And so I think the first obstacle and con is just getting yourself to a point where you got to put in the work, right? You got to grind, you got to hustle, you got to learn how to close, how to talk the language, how to find the motivated seller. That's the first obstacle and con in the process. It's not easy to do, right? To find and hone in on that process. The second con is in the transaction. So now I have a seller, right? The biggest concern that a seller has, and let's talk about sub 2 for a second, right? Sub 2 is where I am legitimately taking over the payments of the underlying mortgage that's on the property, but I am not assuming the loan. Those are two different things. Okay. You can do loan assumptions where you literally take the loan into your own name, but then you have to go back to the traditional way of buying. You have to credit, down payment, etc., all that stuff, right? But in the subject to, all I'm doing is just taking over the payments, and then the seller actually keeps the mortgage in their name, right? And automatically there's a lot of red flags there as a seller. First, how can I trust that this buyer is going to legitimately pay the note? Because if he doesn't, then that's on my credit, right? There's a risk there as to my credit is on the line. And then second, there's a big one that, it's a big boogeyman that's always brought up in this industry, and that's the DOSC, right? That's the due on sale clause. how can I ensure that a bank, once they see that this mortgage is in this person's name, but deed and title have then transferred to this new buyer, this new entity that I don't know, how can you ensure that they're not going to call the note due at that point in time? Right. So those are the two big cons, right? That I would say that people always get held up on. And a lot of times, like that's where you find a lot of this pool of analysis paralysis people that don't ever take action because they just don't know that there's ways around these, right? There's way to execute these the right way. And that is the first one, right? With the seller. As a seller, you have to make sure that whoever's buying it is a credible buyer. But then on top of that, it's very important to work with the transaction coordinator and title company that puts the appropriate documentation in place to protect that seller, right? I.e., I forget what it's called, but there's a way that we can put basically a quick claim deed that's signed and executed in escrow that and then basically tell the title company and instruct them that, hey, listen, if this buyer goes into default, and we can set what that time frame means. It could be 31 days. It doesn't have to be 90, right? Let's call it 31 days. If this buyer does not make a payment on the 31st day, then automatically that quick claim deed is executed and then the seller gets their property back, including all of the down payment or whatever else is in the home that's there, right? So there's ways to transact this from a seller's perspective that protects them but also allows the buyer to be able to have this property and to be able to cash flow and to be able to execute on the deal, which we've done, right? The second is the DOSC, which is a big boogeyman, right? Statistically, there's only been 2% of DOSCs that have ever been called on these notes. And when you dive into the details of even that 2%, usually it's reactive, right? Usually this is a bank looking at the note that is in default and realizing that title is no longer in this mortgage holder's name, right? And so if you can make sure insurance is good, if you can transact the deal on a wrap note correctly, and then make sure that you're paying the note, typically the bank is going to be fine because banks do not make money when they call notes due. They don't, right? Banks are not incentivized to be able to call a note due. They make money in the long term. So as long as they're eating, they're happy. They're fat and happy, right? And so so sorry, I don't know if that was too much
No,
detail, but
no, that was
that's
actually all of my questions because what I'm
okay.
trying to learn to do as a host is to limit my questions and just let guests flow. And you did so beautifully because that was one of the big boogeymans that I've always heard of. And I have heard of the same things. And people are like, well, but now interest rates are so much higher. So the banks have people like looking at rates because it's gonna be I'm like, no, they don't. Nobody's paying somebody to be like this little Grinch of interest rates that is just sitting there and be like, let me see if these rates are changing, right? I love how you address what a seller should be looking for, right? In terms of like the buyer being reputable and all that good stuff. So if one of our listeners wants to do this, similar to how we teach in STR Secrets, we give you a reputation package, right? What are some of those things that you would add into your reputation package so as somebody that listens to this is going to meet a seller for the first time, just like, okay, like how would you stack the odds in your favor? What would you bring up?
Yeah. When I first jumped into this, right? And this is all just a matter of really in my opinion, communication skills, right? When I first jumped into this, the only doors that I had to my name were legitimately just my primary and then a few other investments that I was part of. So I was barely an investor when I decided to open the acquisition arm. So the conversation that I had at that point in time when I would approach a seller creatively is my experience with my management company or the experience that I had in the short-term rental space. It goes a long way with the seller when you can clearly articulate your plan of action when you are with the property when you're wanting to buy it creatively, right? Especially in this methodology of that property is going to be a short-term rental. Because when I would approach a seller, when I had no experience in creative, nothing at all, my very first deal, really the conversation was just walking them through the process of how I was going to make the payment. And in that is simply, look, I'm going to buy this property. My plan with it is to list it on the short-term rental. These are the comps for it as a short-term rental. And mind you, I don't make money until the mortgage is paid. And so I'm communicating to the seller legitimately like, look, for you to make money, I have to make money. And these are the comps that we have in this area. And oh, by the way, I have this management company. So I have experience in it. I'm well polished. I know what I'm doing. These comps, I trust them because most of them are mine, right? I actually manage these properties. And I started buying properties, by the way, in areas that I operated in just because I knew the comps, right? It was very easy to know what I was going to make. So then I can go and negotiate the interest rate. But, anyways, the point being here is I was just leveraging whatever relevant experience I had, even though it wasn't necessarily acquiring, and then just communicating very clearly as to my plan of action, showing them comps, showing them numbers, showing them historicals in the area, air DNA, showing them my experience in it. And you can imagine as a seller how good that must feel when somebody can clearly tell you their exit. And there's a lot of people aren't doing that, right? One of the things I love about creative, right, is it's different than any other acquisition negotiation simply because you're approaching it from a place of solving a problem, right? If I'm a cash buyer, if I have to go to a seller with cash, I have to undercut them. I have to be a shark because the numbers just don't pencil if I'm not buying this flip at 60% LTV, right? So there's literally no room for error. But a creative deal is me approaching a seller and being like, look, at most gross, we're going to make $5,000 a month. After costs and everything, I'm retaining, let's call it 70% of that margin. Your mortgage right now, you have a 2% interest rate. So what if we did this? What if I make sure not only you get your 2%, but what if I paid you 3%? That would then give us a mortgage of X amount. This is my gross, my net margin. So there's a spread in here for me, right? You make 1% on your note. I get to take over a note that's literally half of what market is, and there's a win-win. And that's what those negotiations look like. Is it's really just a matter of like, hey, here's a problem, here's a solution. Let's just figure out how we can all win here, right? And when you can communicate that clearly, I'm telling you, it's such an easy tool to be able to close. And mind you, again, I'm not talking about my like at that point, I didn't have any owned Airbnbs. At that point, I was just a really just any other buyer approaching them to buy an investment property. But because I had a plan of action, I could communicate it very clearly. I was leveraging the experience I did have to bring credibility to my name. It actually ends up being a very easy conversation than people realize. These are all things that I now teach in my own community, right? And there's students that are closing every week because it's really not as simple or it's not as complex as people think. It's a lot simpler than people think. So I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, dude, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like, I think some of the mistakes out there as people are teaching this is this whole like fake it till you make it. And I've never been a big believer in that because people can smell it. At least that's been my opinion. Whereas instead it's just like, dude, just quit it. Just give it how it is and find your value in what you have done. And we all have done tons of great things. You just need to look at how you look at your past experiences and find your silver lining as to, okay, like this is what I can use here. This is what I can use there. And it's all a matter of like addressing all of the stories and the concerns up front. And that's why I love, first of all, how well you explained everything because guys, he literally gave you guys everything a seller could have an issue with. And instead of waiting for questions, you address them from the beginning. And so there is also where being a great investor really comes through is you understand objections and you handle them before they come up. Because then all you're going to give the seller, because sellers, most of the times, they may be different level of sophistication, but they'll ask some questions and they'll have people ask questions for them and they'll have somebody there helping them, right? And so in you being just calm about things and really going through all your objections beforehand, you can go there and be like, look, I'm here to serve.
Yep. Well, and just to add what one of the things you said I really like, right? People can smell BS, but they also can taste authenticity, right? And what I love when you approach a seller with authenticity is like it's then a conversation about how can we solve each other's problems mutually. And it's not a negotiation, right? And that's what I love about it, is because you can have extended conversations with people that alternatively, I have a lot of people that actually have been in masterminds, both in Pace's community, but also in a lot of wholesale communities that have the feedback has been, wow, I mean, we really like this approach because I'm talking to a lot more people and having more conversations as opposed to feel like I'm just burning through the phone, right? I'm just burning contacts, right? And again, like just in my mind and how I've been able to grow has been approaching this acquisition strategy specifically from an authentic and very clear communication way of approaching the seller of your intent of what to do and everything like that, right?
Yeah. No, I love that.
And it's worked out really well.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
walk us through, unless I don't know that you have tons of money hidden everywhere, right? I assume after a little bit, even creatively, right? There's a point in
Yeah, yeah.
time that you run out of money, right? So if people want down payment money, if you need rental money, you need furniture money, you don't have infinite money, right? You're not one of those
Yep.
people.
Yep.
Or
I'm
yeah,
not. I am
you're
not.
not.
No. No.
Perfect. So
Definitely not.
so how you been financing those? Because 120 keys in 4 years is quite a bit of money. So where are you finding the money? Walk us through that process.
Yeah. One of the keys to that, because I bought my first 3 creative deals with my own money, and full transparency was on a HELOC, and that went very quickly. It went very, very quickly. And then I found myself at a point in time where I was like, okay, I'm back to the same problem now, right? Of like, how do I have all this money to be able to go buy creative? Even though I know I figured out how to buy without credit, all this crap, right? How do I then get the capital to be able to do that? And this is where the capital markets came into play. And the first step to that I needed to understand was really shifting my perspective and my paradigm on the idea of abundance of capital. And what I mean by that is there is so many people in arm's reach that have 50, 100, 200, $1 million in cash parked in a high yield savings account making garbage returns, a 401k, a Roth IRA, a self directed IRA, whatever. There is so much money out there for capital partners for finding them, right? And one of the key like perspective changes for me was twofold. First, realizing, recognizing there's an abundance of money out there. But then second, realizing that good deals in any market, they're not just found, they're created. And when you can create the deal, the money is hella easy to find, right? When you can create the deal in the market, money just comes. And it was a surprise to me when I did my first deal with the capital partner, how easy it was to get 100 grand from somebody, right? And that's because the deal was there. I had bought a deal that was creative, had a 3.75% interest rate. The cash flow was incredible. I literally had a case study from a property that I managed, didn't own, but managed 2 doors down. So I could show him exactly what it was going to make. And then I gave him better returns than his HELOC or 401k was giving him, right? Which typically is 5%, right? And so now I structure my deals to where there's a set pref that typically beats the market. There's an equity upside depending on the deal. And then, oh, by the way, we haven't even gotten to taxes, right? And that's really where it took off, was then realizing that there is benefits to short-term rentals that people can be a part of that you can then offer them. And then they're giving you the check that they would have wrote to Uncle Sam, right? And that's a lot of money when you get in the right circles, right? And so it all comes back, in my opinion, to kind of those two mindset shifts. There's an abundance of money out there, and money follows the deal when you can create it. And when you can create it, you will be surprised how many people have just been waiting for you to ask. They're just waiting for you to bring them a deal. And once you have the deal, it's usually a pretty simple conversation after that. So and that's how we've done it. That's how we've scaled. I've raised now up to this point multiple 7 figures, a lot just private capital, just your neighbors, friends, church members. Like there's just a lot of people here that have money, and there's a lot of people that don't want to take risk. There's a lot of people that will never start their own business, but they want to be able to call themselves an investor. They want to be able to call themselves a real estate investor. They just don't know how. And that's where you come into play. When you can create the deal, money always follows. So
Mm,
Mm.
this has been great. Lots of goodies.
The thing that I just want to highlight too, because I remember when I was first getting into real estate, before I got into short-term rentals and all this stuff, I was getting coached by Joe Fairless and some other folks, and I thought I was going to go the multifamily route. And there's, they teach all these different processes for raising money and all these different things. And what I've learned over the years is just telling people what you do. Like, we're in such a sexy industry that people wanna be in the game, and to your point, they're busy, they don't wanna invest the time to learn how to do it. Once you've got somewhat of a track record and some case studies, it's like it's easy. It really is, if you get out there, and that was the mistake I made at the beginning, especially when I was still in my job. People would ask me, "What do you do?" And I would just puke out, "I'm a CPA," instead of, "I'm a real estate investor, specializing in Airbnbs." Then they're like, "Oh, really? Tell me. That's interesting," right? Anytime I'm playing in a golf tournament or whatever, inevitably, I played in one a few weeks ago. Mike Riley flew up, who's our COO, and we were paired up with this guy, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've got this place up in New Hampshire, and Picasa's managing it, and they're I hate them. Like, I want somebody else." I'm like, "Oh, interesting. Well, I've got a network, I could put you in touch with and whatever." Like, you'd be amazed the opportunities that come up when you just open your mouth and talk about what you do. It's not selling. It's just, this is what I do, and it's conversational. I guarantee you've raised money just from having conversations with people.
absolutely. I mean, one of my golden stories is like I raised 200 grand from a lady where I met in a Costco line. It was a 15-minute conversation. Less than 24 hours later, she wired me 200 grand.
I mean, that's like a little disclaimer though. This man has done door-to-door sales, so he's a Roger Federer and a Tom Brady or what. Like, give it like I'm not saying that that's not possible for you guys, but please understand time on task. This man like can sell like ice to like you know what I'm saying. He's just like, listen, bro, like this
Yeah,
this little
for
dome of
sure.
yours is looking a little weird. I got some ice for you, and the guys be like, do I need ice for this guy?
Yeah,
You're
for
like,
sure.
yeah, yeah, no, you do. Like,
And listen, that's why I always bring up my door-to-door experience, because it was very obviously it was crucial in like what I've built now, right? But I'm telling you, if you saw some of the students that have closed deals with none of their own money, like you would realize how really simple this is. Like, granted, for somebody to get to 100 doors, there's a lot that needs to happen. My point is, for somebody to get to your first door, it's right within arm's reach. Everything, the deal, the money, the execution, it's all right there, right? And so that's what I love about this, because there is so many things in our favor today in real estate and in the economy. There's so many people that are cash strapped right now. They're taking things out of stock. They're holding it close to their chest because they just don't know what to do. And so there's just so much value that's been pented up for us to execute. To your point, Mike, it's just a matter of asking the question and opening your mouth and talking about it. And that's exactly what I've done, right? I mean, Mike, when I first met you, I had like 1,000 Instagram followers, right? We're at 11.1, and my Instagram wasn't crazy. It still isn't. Like, there's still a lot of things that I need to figure out, work on, but I just got loud. I stopped caring what people thought about what I said and what I did, and I cared more about my own business and finding the people that I wanted to do business with. And that, again, like, sales gets this like connotation to it that I hate, that's always negative, and I understand why, because there's a lot of sleazy guys out there, but in my mind, a good salesman is somebody that is just an excellent communicator, right? And the best, they're not the people that are trying to sell everybody. That's what I've learned. I'm not trying to sell everybody. I'm just really good at finding the people that are my buyers over and over and over again, right? I'm not like you. A lot of people maybe imagine me like pitching everybody, and that's not it. That's just me talking with people and understanding the right people and the right metrics that I'm looking for, and then just telling those people a little bit more about what I do, and then the money just follows, right? And I'm telling you, it's a lot simpler than people make it out to be, right? But it's not easy. That's what I'll say. It's not easy, but it is very simple.
I love that. Well, on that note, before we get into the last question, Lame, first I want to thank you for coming on here, dude. I appreciate our friendship, and I've loved seeing you grow and absolutely smash it over the last few years. Where can the folks learn more about you and Elkridge and Fearless Investor and all the cool stuff you got going on?
Yeah, so my personal Instagram is where a lot of people get in contact with me. So it's at Hailameke, HAILAMEK, and I'm on Instagram primarily. But then we also have the fearlessinvestors.co is where you can find your education platform. And we have a lot of students that are involved in the STR game, but my niche is this. What I'm telling you guys is how to buy money, how to buy creative deals with, half the interest rate of today's market with none of your own money, right? And turning them into cash flowing assets. And so you can find us on that website. It's the fearless investors, plural.co. So
Love it, man. Well, the last question that we ask all of our guests is, what is your number one secret to success with short-term rentals?
number one secret to success, man, that's a good question. Um, this is something I feel like I beat a dead horse every time I say it. And maybe it's just because I'm me and I hear myself say it all the time. But it's the truest statement that I've ever realized in my career. And it's twofold. The first one, okay, people are not nearly as smart as we think they are, right? That person that you're listening to on a podcast that has 180 doors and is cash flowing, living the life, right? They're not nearly as smart as you give them credit for, right? Whatever mentor, whatever person you look up to, you just need to know that and understand it and believe it. And then the second belief that needs to take place is you're a hell of a lot more capable than you're telling yourself right now, right? And that is where magic happens, is when you can realize that the mentors you look up to are not God. Okay. They're not nearly as smart as you think they are. And you are a hell of a lot more capable and closer to them than you realize. And once you do that, everything else follows. Real estate is simply a byproduct of your personal progress, right? And relationships, really. More importantly, the relationship you have with yourself. When you can figure out the mindset game, real estate, income, everything else follows. The best piece of real estate to invest in is the real estate between your ears. And I live and die by that.
That is the best piece of advice we've heard on this show, hands down. And I agree
Yeah,
wholeheartedly.
100%.
Well, Lame, appreciate you, bro. Thank you so much for coming on. For listeners out there, this is probably going to be one of those that you want to favorite, listen to a few times, take some notes, and don't sleep on that last bit of advice. Best investments I make are in between my ears every time. It's never a piece of real estate. So
Prime real
appreciate you
estate right
guys.
there.
Hey, thank you guys for having me.
You bet, brother. Have an amazing week, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Hey, STR Nation, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. And in the comments, let us know what topics you want us to cover on upcoming episodes, and we'll make sure to get that in the books for you. And if you really want to learn how to launch, automate, and scale your short-term rental business, if you want to go deeper, then check out our free masterclass at strsecrets.com.